Alaric Sheffield, I'm at the coffee shop. Come pick me up now. The voice on the other end was firm, leaving no room for refusal before hanging up. I saved my work document, shut down the computer, and ran my fingers through my messy hair. Grabbing my jacket, I rushed out to the bar. The person I was going to pick up was Winifred Shaw, my aunt's daughter. We weren't particularly close, but since she had called me, I couldn't refuse. If anything were to happen, the police would come looking for me first. The coffee shop was located in the South Borough of Jiangqing, a recently popular spot in the city. Many women enjoyed spending time there. At first, I thought it was because the place was honest and cheap. Later, I learned it was because the coffee shop had all sorts of male models, alpha males, soft boys, innocent types, assertive ones, you name it, they had it. Feeling uncomfortable, I turned to leave the bar and dialed Winifred's number, but there was no answer. Recalling that there was no background noise when she called earlier, I figured she must be upstairs. Sure enough, as I climbed to the second floor, I heard Winifred's angry voice from above. Don't touch me. Didn't you say we were breaking up? Fine, let's break up then. I'd be a fool to get back together with you. Get lost. Winifred pushed away the young man in front of her, grabbed her bag, and started hitting him. The man just stood there, letting her hit him. Winifred cried as she weakly struck the man's body. When she had enough, she hugged him and began to sob loudly. The man gently patted her back, comforting her, "Don't cry." Winifred mumbled angrily through her tears, "I don't want your comfort." The man took Winifred's hand, crouched down, and lifted her onto his back. Winifred didn't resist, instead wrapping her arms around his neck and continuing to cry. They passed by me, completely ignoring my presence. A gentle breeze blew through the window, and my anger dissipated like a ghost. "Aren't you leaving?" A magnetic, gentle male voice came from the dark corner. Startled, I quickly retreated to a well-lit area. Then I heard a mechanical click, and a light flickered in the corner. A man was leaning against the wall in the corner. If he hadn't lit his lighter, you wouldn't have noticed anyone there at all. He casually put away his lighter and emerged from the corner, tilting his chin to glance at me, his eyes full of gentle charm. The man wore a suit with his hair slicked back. He had sharp features, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. He exuded a bad boy charm that was undeniably attractive. One look at him, and all you could think was how handsome he was, and how unworthy you felt in comparison. My heart suddenly tightened, and I began to feel flustered. "You seem to enjoy watching drama unfold," he said to me, his voice cool and collected. "Life is truly unfair. Why do some people not only look good but also have such captivating voices?" I didn't respond to the man's comment, just silently observing him. The man didn't seem to mind. He loosened his tie and began unbuttoning his shirt with one hand. Feeling it was impolite to stare, I quickly turned away and reminded him, "You don't need to do that. I'm leaving. I'm not here for you." The man paused in unbuttoning his shirt, glanced at me, and smiled somewhat helplessly. Suddenly, he spoke, "If you're not here for me, how about a kiss instead?" I stared at him in disbelief, wide-eyed. How could someone who looked so proper be so shameless? The man before me smiled mischievously, waiting for my response. Suddenly, he leaned in closer, like a seductive fairy from a TV drama. "One kiss, 10,000 pounds. I was stunned. 10,000 pounds? Did he think he was made of gold? I raised my hand, about to slap him when he leaned in close to my ear and repeated, "Kiss me once, and I'll give you 10,000 pounds. I stepped back, my face flushing red. Trying to buy my self-respect with money was too much. I gritted my teeth, "You're insulting my integrity." The man snickered and opened a nearby door, walking in. I looked around, saw no one, and quickly followed him inside, closing the door behind me. Can integrity be measured by money? It can't. Integrity helps us progress, motivates us to work hard. It's inexhaustible. But money isn't. Money will run out one day. People shouldn't be so shallow. The man poured a glass of red wine and sat down on the sofa. He raised an eyebrow, looking at me with an amused expression as he swirled the wine in his glass. I moved closer to him, returning his smile. My tone took a dramatic turn. I choose to kiss you because I'm rather shallow. Oh, and just asking, can I kiss you more than once? You may, the man chuckled, putting down his wine glass and leaning back on the sofa, presenting himself as if ready to be picked like fruit. I felt a mix of joy and disappointment, joy that he agreed, disappointment that he agreed so easily. I went over and sat on the sofa next to him. The man obligingly closed his eyes, truly looking like a beautiful fairy tale creature. I placed my hands on his shoulders, finding a good position. As I leaned in closer to his handsome face, I felt a twinge of regret, but opportunities like this don't come often. You snooze, you lose. I closed my eyes, hardly daring to breathe, and slowly moved towards the man. When I was about 4 inches from his alluring lips, my hands began to tremble, and I withdrew them from his shoulders. Suddenly, the man before me opened his eyes, revealing a hint of mischief in his narrow gaze. I won't force you if you don't want to dash. Before he could finish, I quickly pecked him on the cheek. The soft touch felt like an electric shock. The man's breath brushed against my face, causing my heart to race and my cheeks to burn. I quickly stood up and took out my phone, afraid he would notice my embarrassment. Is that enough? The man's face was slightly flushed. It's enough, I replied, taking a deep breath. I opened my contactless payment app and held it out to him. The man took out his phone and promptly transferred £10,000. Upon hearing the successful transaction notification, I clutched my phone and left the coffee shop, feeling like a child who had done something wrong. The evening park was always full of elderly people and children. Some danced, some played chess, some just played around. I, however, wandered about like a lost soul drained of all energy. Now I finally understood what it meant to be haunted by a guilty conscience. It constantly reminded me that I had sold myself for money, to the point where even spending the money made me think of that man. Alaric, open up. Open the door. I recognized that voice immediately. It was Audrey, my next-door neighbor, 2 years older than me, a proper office worker. She's a decent person, just talks too much sometimes. I find it hard to keep up with her at times. With dark circles under my eyes from 2 sleepless nights, I struggled to open the door. Audrey burst in, her deafening voice echoing through the flat. Rick, I got bullocked by that bloody boss today. She hugged me, wailing to the heavens as if she were more wrong than Tess of the D'Urberville. I glanced at the clock, it was already 10:30 at night. Thank goodness for good soundproofing, or Audrey's loud voice would have gotten us dozens of complaints by now. After cursing her boss's entire family, she moved on to gossip about her coworkers. Listen, Mabel from our office, she's broken up with her boyfriend. Guess why? I played along, no idea. Well, let me tell you. Mabel found out somehow that her boyfriend had slept with his ex. Then, every time he tried to touch her, she felt disgusted. In the end, they split up. She gesticulated wildly as if she had experienced it herself. Her words, however, set me thinking. After a while, I spoke up, Audrey, if your boyfriend had kissed someone else before, would it bother you? Audrey gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing like a demon's. She clenched her fists so hard they creaked. If he'd been with someone else, I'd kill him outright. I countered, not been with, just kissed. A light peck. Just a peck? Audrey repeated my words. I nodded several times. She looked at me as if deep in thought. Just when I thought she was about to answer my question, she grinned mischievously. Rick, you're acting strange. Have you got yourself a boyfriend? I nervously replied, no, I haven't found a boyfriend. Audrey didn't believe me and started pestering me. Finally, I confessed, I went to the coffee shop and met a bloke. Then I kissed him. She exclaimed, Rick, I know you've been forever alone for 25 years, and sometimes you need a boyfriend, but there's no need to degrade yourself like this. That male colleague who came back with me the other day, he told me he fancies you, he's just afraid you don't like him. Why on earth would you go to the coffee shop to sleep with some model? Audrey's hearing was truly worrying. I explained again, I didn't sleep with him. I kissed him, and he gave me 10 grand. Audrey stared at me, her pupils dilated in shock. She enunciated each word. He gave you 10 grand? I nodded. She sat down, gripping my shoulders, and said gravely, tell me, what exactly happened? I gave her a simplified version of the events. She was stunned, shaking me frantically. Sister, why didn't you tell me about such a good opportunity? What does this model look like? I'm going to find him tonight. Audrey, you'll regret it. I already do. And he might not even be a model. Regret? That's impossible, she said, wagging her finger. You take me to find that bloke, I'll kiss him senseless. With that, Audrey returned to her flat to get dolled up. An hour later, there was another knock at the door. Audrey stood in my doorway, striking a pose in a red bodycon dress, a Chanel handbag on her shoulder, and sunglasses perched on her nose. She pulled down her glasses, looking at me with disappointment. Alaric Sheffield, we're about to go out and you can't even sort out your head? Go put on some makeup and then we'll leave. I refused. No thanks, I don't feel like doing much lately. I'll just put on a mask in a bit. This was indeed true. Since that day, I'd been suffering from insomnia, feeling awful, not wanting to do anything. Even managing this much was my limit. Audrey seemed to notice something was off. She smoothed my hair behind my ear and smiled. It's all right, don't worry. Big sis will take you to find your model. I forced a smile and followed her out. On the third floor of the coffee shop. Audrey looked troubled. Are you sure? I looked at the large letters she was pointing at. VIP room, no entry. Back on the ground floor. Audrey had somehow managed to drag over a male model. Under her threats and persuasion, he handed over all the photos of the male models, but unfortunately, the man wasn't among them. As the alcohol took effect, Audrey leaned in close to me and muttered, Alaric Sheffield, I've helped you this far, you'd better call that bloke over now. I was confused, not sure what she meant. What? Stop pretending. When you told me about him, your expression gave you away. When you talked about that man, your whole face turned red, from your cheeks to your ears. When we couldn't find him in the photos just now, I knew you must know him. His name is Arthur Jarrett. Audrey Thornton covered her mouth, a bit surprised. She probably didn't expect me to say it. But that's all I said, and I didn't continue. My hand holding the juice started shaking again. I drank it all in one gulp and hurriedly left the coffee shop. Outside, a light drizzle had started falling without me noticing. As soon as I left the coffee shop, that melancholic feeling washed over me. I found a spot where the streetlights couldn't reach, curled up into a ball, and tears began to flow uncontrollably. I bit my sleeve to muffle my sobs. I don't know how long I stayed there, but suddenly I heard someone shouting nearby. Alaric Sheffield, what are you doing? Audrey Thornton walked towards me with her phone, the light from it painfully bright. I kept my head down without speaking. Audrey started to panic. Alaric, don't scare me. You know I'm easily frightened. Fighting the discomfort, I looked up to reassure her, I'm fine. But Audrey didn't calm down as I had expected. Instead, she screamed as if she'd seen a ghost, stumbling backwards and falling to the ground before scrambling back up, staring at me in horror. At the same time, her scream attracted a group of people who had just left the coffee shop. Their gazes felt like burning flames on my skin as they pointed and gossiped about me. What's wrong with that person? Heartbroken or divorced? Someone nearby spoke up loudly, are you all blind? Anyone can see this person is sick, and quite seriously too. Suddenly, a coat was draped over me, and Arthur Jarrett's voice sounded in my ear. Alaric, don't be afraid. I'll take you away from here. Arthur picked me up from the ground and tossed his car keys to a young man nearby. Edmund, go bring my car over. Arthur carried me to the car and took me to a small clinic nearby. The clinic wasn't large, but it was very cozy inside. A young female doctor was there. She handed me a wet wipe to clean my face. It was actually for the blood at the corner of my mouth. Looking at the bloodstains on the tissue, I could understand why Audrey had been so terrified. It's just a small injury, nothing to worry about. It'll heal in a few days, the female doctor said as she cleaned the wounds on my arm. She continued to comfort me as she brought bandages to wrap them up, then set up in 4 drip for me. Throughout all of this, neither Arthur nor I had said a word to each other. I didn't know when he had recognized me. Was it just now when Audrey called my name, or had he, like me, recognized the other person some time ago? Arthur pulled up a chair and sat down, occasionally glancing at the 4 drip, then lowering his head to play with his phone. The female doctor, however, brought over a bowl of pudding rice and some banana leaves. As she started wrapping them, she suddenly asked me, "Young lady, Easter is coming up in a few days. Do you know how to make Christmas pudding?" I shook my head. The woman smiled and explained, "I didn't mean anything by it. I don't know how to make it either, so I was hoping you could teach me. I want to send some to my daughter in a few days. It's all right if you don't know how." I was a bit surprised and inadvertently met Arthur's gaze. Arthur didn't avoid my eyes, looking straight at me, making me feel uneasy. "I only know a little bit. I'll tell you, and you can follow along," I said quickly, turning my head away and speaking with some urgency. The woman was delighted. "Great!" She followed my instructions, making mistakes and correcting them until she finally wrapped a complete pudding. During this time, Arthur sat nearby watching us, his gaze constantly on me, making me stutter as I spoke. Fortunately, Arthur was called away by a phone call, and I finally relaxed from my nervous state. The woman looked at me and asked with a smile, "Young lady, is he your boyfriend?" "No, we're just friends. Or perhaps we couldn't even be considered friends." "Is that so?" "Then I must have misunderstood," the woman said as she removed my 4 and prescribed some medication for me. I took the medicine, paid, and said a brief goodbye to the woman before leaving the clinic. Across the street, under a plane tree, Arthur was leaning against his car. His white shirt made him stand out in the darkness. A gentle breeze ruffled a few strands of his hair, making him look less cold than usual and more approachable, even a bit silly. Just like in high school, he was like a firecracker ready to explode at any moment, yet people couldn't help but want to get close to him. He lit a cigarette, but just as he was about to put it to his lips, he put it down and extinguished it with one hand when he saw me approaching. "It's getting late. I'll drive you home," he said. I politely declined, "No need. You've already helped me enough today. I can get back on my own." Arthur glanced at me sideways, his tone odd. "I'm not driving you back for free. You haven't even paid me for the petrol from earlier. If I take you home, you can pay me for both trips together." I was surprised, but I understood. Arthur had always been like this, ready to snap at anyone from childhood to adulthood. "Show me your Apple Pay, and I'll pay you for the petrol," I said. He took out his phone and held the screen in front of me. After I scanned it, I hesitated. I usually take the bus or use Uber, so I wasn't sure how much a ride in a Rolls-Royce should cost. Seeing the bloodstains on his shirt, I added 2 zeros and sent him £2,000. "I've paid you for the ride. Thank you for today. Goodbye," I said, walking past him and leaving. I had only gone a short distance when Arthur caught up in his car. He rolled down the window and said coldly, "Get in." I had just opened my mouth to say when he cut me off. "Are you planning to circle the globe to get home?" Left with no retort, I silently walked around and got into the passenger seat. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Courtyard House," I replied. Arthur turned the car around and drove back down the street we had just come from. Suddenly, he asked me, "How have you been these past few years?" I answered automatically, "All right." "Got a boyfriend?" I didn't know why Arthur suddenly asked if I had a boyfriend. After pondering for a moment, I gave a non-committal When we reached the entrance of Courtyard House, I got out of the car. "Thank you for driving me home. How much do I owe you for the ride?" "I'll pay you." "Alaric," Arthur called out to me. I looked at him as he lit a cigarette and held it between his fingers. "Give me your phone," he said. Without thinking too much, I handed him my phone. After fiddling with it for a bit, he returned it to me. To my surprise, Arthur had refunded the £2,000. I wanted to explain, but before I could open my mouth, he started the car and drove away. I stood there bewildered, unable to understand what Arthur meant. One moment he wanted payment, the next he didn't. After standing at the intersection for a long while, I finally moved towards Building C. As I passed the rubbish bin, I threw the medicine into it. I've taken too many pills. The sight of medicine just irritates me now. Just as I was about to enter the passcode on the 9th floor, I heard a voice behind me. Alaric, you're back. Audrey poked her head out, her voice soft and weak, unlike her usual boisterous self. I gave a non-committal and continued entering the passcode. But she spoke up again. Alaric, do you have depression? My hand paused as I was pulling the door open. I turned to look at her and asked the question that had been bothering me. Did I look terrifying earlier, like a lost soul? Audrey shrank back a bit, swallowed, and stammered, not terribly so. I didn't call her out on it, just wished her good night. I hadn't been able to sleep well for days, but today, after getting in 4 drip, I fell asleep quickly. However, my sleep was still fitful, and I experienced a strange state of lucid dreaming. When I woke up in the morning, my head was throbbing. Last night, I actually dreamt of Arthur. Not only did I kiss him, but I also hugged him. Perhaps it was due to our sudden encounter and my longing for him that triggered this dream. Back in secondary school, my father had an affair, and I was given to my mother after their divorce. My mother was constantly depressed, and every time she saw me, she was reminded of my father, which made her irritable even towards me. Due to the lack of attention, I became unruly at school. After drifting aimlessly for half a month, I met Arthur, the second to last in our class at the University of Jiangxing. Why wasn't he last? Because I held that position. In the second term of year 10, my mother changed her attitude. Although she still found me irritating, she started to care about me. She told me to study hard and not be like my father, wasting her sincere efforts. While I verbally disagreed, I did start taking my studies seriously. Seeing this, Arthur made a bet with me: whoever scored higher in the exams, the loser would have to clean the classroom for a term. Because of this, Arthur and I grew closer, becoming almost inseparable. That year, to everyone's surprise, Arthur came first, and I came fourth. As a result, I took over Arthur's cleaning duties for the first term of year 11. I felt frustrated, regretting making the bet. Later, a rumor spread in the University of Jiangxing. Don't worry about Ethel Faulkner and Wilfred Plummer coming first, worry when Alaric Sheffield and Arthur Jarrett start studying seriously. Even after I transferred schools, classmates would ask if I was that Alaric Sheffield from the University of Jiangxing. I always denied it. Alaric, are you in? Audrey Thornton knocked on the door cautiously, holding a Christmas pudding in her hand. Seeing me open the door, she sighed in relief and smiled, handing me the pudding. Happy Christmas! I brought you a pudding. I forced a smile. If it weren't illegal, I'd definitely punch her. For 5 consecutive days, Audrey had been knocking on my door, once before work and once after. She'd either bring snacks or wake me up early. After work, she'd invite me shopping or for a walk, never repeating the same activity. It was driving me mad. Looking at the pudding in my hand, I said patiently, "Thank you, you can go now." Despite my clear dismissal, Audrey showed no intention of leaving. She looked at me mischievously and said, "I'm off work today, so you must go shopping with me this afternoon." No refusing this time. Before I could react, Audrey squeezed through the door, dragged me to the dressing table, and started applying makeup on me without my consent. Audrey's makeup skills were quite good. After she finished, I looked completely different from before. Audrey pulled me out the door, and we went everywhere, eating, drinking, and shopping. Finally, she took me to a gathering with her friends. As soon as we arrived, she started chatting with people around, seemingly forgetting about me. As night fell, more and more people arrived. A young man approached me and said directly, "Love, could you move over a bit?" I shifted towards the corner, suddenly realizing something was off, and jumped up. Arthur pulled off the blanket covering him, removed his earphones, and irritatedly ruffled his hair. His voice carried a hint of anger. "Edmund, are you asking for trouble?" He wasn't dressed formally today, wearing a black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. His hair was messy from sleeping. He wasn't here when I arrived earlier. Did he come when I stepped out? Thinking about this, I met Arthur's sleepy, dissatisfied, murderous gaze. I lowered my head and stammered an apology. Sorry. Arthur was taken aback for a moment. He got up and grabbed the t-shirt of the man who had asked me to move, dragging him towards the table. The man panicked and pleaded with Arthur, "Arthur, mate, the girl didn't mean it. No need to rough me up." Arthur glanced at me, then shoved the man away. "Sorry we're late." A couple entered hand in hand, causing a stir among the crowd. Edmund quickly grabbed a drink and passed it over, the usual. Wilfred took it and drank it in one go. He smiled and said, "Ethel and I are getting married next month. Don't forget your wedding gifts." Edmund punched Wilfred's shoulder. "You cheeky bastard, it's still a month away and you're already after our money." Everyone was amused by the two, and conversations started flowing. I still couldn't join in, so I sat in the corner. Alaric Sheffield? I don't know when Ethel Faulkner noticed me, but she came over to see if she had recognized me correctly. With nowhere to retreat, I had to put on a brave face and greet her. "Ethel, long time no see. It really is you." "I never thought we'd meet again," Ethel said with a smile. I smiled back and glanced at the crowd. I didn't expect it either. Ethel took my hand and led me into the group. She announced loudly, "Back at University of Jiangqing, there was a saying. Don't fear Ethel Faulkner and Wilfred Plummer coming first. Fear Alaric Sheffield and Arthur Jarrett studying hard. You've all been complaining about only seeing the three of us, but today you've met the last one." She glanced at Arthur Jarrett across the room and continued. "Back then, Arthur and Alaric were the class clowns. The teachers both loved and hated them, but couldn't do anything about it. All eyes were on me. Though they were praising me, it made me anxious. Fortunately, I wasn't the focus of today's gathering, so this didn't last long, and I could finally catch my breath." "Alaric, why did you transfer schools in year 12? Ethel asked me. "No reason," I replied. She let the subject drop and made small talk for a while before turning to chat with others. "I don't drink alcohol, not even beer with the lowest alcohol content, so I just stood to the side watching them." Soon, the waiter came to refill drinks and brought some glasses of milk. Audrey Thornton handed me a glass of milk and whispered in my ear, "Someone you're thinking of asked me to give this to you." She then ran off to chat with others. I instinctively looked across at Arthur, who was about to look up. I quickly averted my gaze. "Arthur, is she the one that got away from your school days?" Wilfred Plummer's words weren't too loud, but they reached my ears clearly. "Edmund, I've noticed you're talking a lot of rubbish today. Need me to help you with that?" Arthur retorted sarcastically. Edmund was shocked. "No need, I just heard them say you broke school rules for a girl in secondary school. And you've rejected so many girls at university. I wanted to see what she looked like." He then ran off to join Wilfred. Arthur buried his head in his drink, ignoring him. I looked at Ethel in the crowd, talking elegantly and gracefully, and suddenly felt a mix of envy and jealousy. It seems some people can stay in his heart forever, even if there's no chance, they remain important to him. I quietly sat back on the sofa, shaking badly. Afraid of disturbing others, I left the gathering without saying goodbye. I was too scared to take the lift, so I took the stairs. When I got out of the lobby, I ran into Arthur again. Arthur was crouching by the roadside, looking dejected, with smoke rising from the cigarette in his hand. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen him and walk past while his head was down, but just as I got next to him, he looked up. "Alaric Sheffield." I gripped my sleeve, trying to appear calm. I'm heading back now. Enjoy the rest of the gathering." "Wait, I'll get the car." Arthur stubbed out his cigarette on the ground and tossed it in the nearby bin. "No need, I can go back on my own." I had just started to walk when Arthur grabbed me. I quickly shook off his hand, afraid he'd discover I was a mess. He said in a low voice, "Alaric Sheffield, I have something to ask you." Sitting in the car, I got straight to the point. "What do you want to ask?" Arthur was silent for a moment, then looked at me and asked, "Why did you transfer schools in year 12? This question wasn't unfamiliar, Ethel had asked me earlier. I could brush it off with Ethel, but with Arthur, I knew he wouldn't let me leave without a proper answer. Something happened at home. After saying this, I lowered my head and fell silent. In year 12, I went home for Christmas. My mom was an alcoholic, but she knew not to drive after drinking. After resting for a day, when Mum sobered up, we started the return journey. But sometimes fate likes to play cruel tricks. Halfway through the drive, we encountered a truck carrying steel bars. The truck's brakes failed, and it crashed into us. Mum always said I looked like Dad and would probably be as ungrateful as him in the future. She clearly didn't care about me anymore, yet in that critical moment, she protected me. Alaric, Mum's been unfair to you. I wanted to make it up to you in the future. But it seems Mum can't be with you anymore. Whether you hate Mum or resent Mum, Mum just wants you to live well. Snow started falling, and Mum fell asleep in the snow. When the sun came out, she disappeared with the snowflakes, leaving behind only a small, light urn, lighter than a snowflake. Arthur suddenly made a U-turn at the next intersection. I knew where he was taking me but didn't dare to speak. Only pinching my hand to keep calm. When the car stopped at a red light, Arthur reached out and opened my hand that was pinched red, placing his hand in mine. Alaric Sheffield, don't hurt yourself. Pinch me if you need to, I have thick skin. My eyelashes trembled, and tears fell onto Arthur's hand. He paused for a moment, then gripped my hand tightly. I held his hand, wiping away the tears on the back of it, and choked out. Arthur, I don't want to go to the hospital. Can you take me home? He didn't force me, just replied, all right, I'll take you home. When we arrived at the courtyard house, Arthur didn't leave. Instead, he led me, clearly familiar with the route, around to Building C, up to the 9th floor, and stopped precisely in front of my flat. Password? Arthur asked. 654312. Arthur typed in the password, not forgetting to tease me, 9 years on, and your memory's still rubbish. His tone was light, though, with a hint of affection. As soon as we entered, Arthur questioned the Christmas puddings on the table. Still have puddings? Audrey brought them over. You haven't eaten any. No appetite. Arthur stared at the puddings for a while, then looked at me. I haven't eaten since this afternoon. Could I heat up a couple to fill my stomach? I nodded in agreement. Arthur took the puddings to the kitchen. I watched his retreating back, lost in thought as I looked at the hand he had just held. About 15 minutes later, Arthur emerged from the kitchen with the puddings, offering one to me. I got greedy and heated up extra. Here's 2 for you. I took the pudding, my hands shaking as I unwrapped it. Arthur reached out to take it from me. I dodged his hand, stammering, it's fine, I can manage. I unwrapped the pudding and held it up to him, feigning pride. See? I've got it open. I took a bite, glanced at the dark sky outside, and reminded Arthur. It's getting late. You should head home. I won't see you out, just remember to close the door behind you. With that, I buried my head and continued eating the pudding, then started on the second one. All the while, Arthur hadn't moved or spoken, just watching me silently. I wolfed down the puddings, went to the kitchen to wash my hands, wiped away my tears, and forced a smile in the mirror before returning to the living room. I'm finished. I can see you out now. Arthur still didn't move or speak. I could barely hold it together, clenching my fists tightly. If you want to stay, the bedroom's on the right. You can sleep there if you're tired of standing. Arthur suddenly raised his hand. I thought he was leaving and lowered my head to open the door, but I bumped into him instead. It wasn't intentional, he had deliberately moved into my path. Alaric, please don't push me away, Arthur said hoarsely. If you don't like me now, I can wait. I'll wait until you do. Arthur's words confirmed my suspicions. The 100-pound kiss at the coffee shop, taking me to the clinic later, finding my flat so easily when he brought me back, perhaps even Audrey's daily knocks were on his instructions. He had recognized me long ago and knew about my condition that I was completely mad. I shouted at him, Arthur! You've seen it all. I'm not the Alaric Sheffield you knew. I'm ill, no different from a lunatic. I have episodes every day. What do you even like about me? Do you enjoy watching me go mad in front of you? Arthur's eyelashes fluttered as he wiped my tear-stained face. I swatted his hand away, muttering, you shouldn't like me. You should be afraid of me, like Audrey and the others. Arthur let out a choked laugh, grabbing my arm and pulling me into his embrace. Afraid? Of you? If anything, you should be afraid of me. I've been pining for you for 9 years. Pining for 9 years? How could it be 9 years? Shouldn't it be just a few months? Why would he say 9 years? Didn't he like Ethel? Don't you like Ethel? I asked. Arthur pouted. Who said I liked Ethel? I'll kill whoever said that. You said it yourself at the year 11 welcome party. You said, that girl who just danced wasn't bad. Arthur was suddenly speechless. He let go of me and looked down at me. Just as I thought he was going to apologize, he suddenly questioned me. Did you hear what I said before that? From his tone, I could guess the answer, so I weakly replied, no. I said, Wilfred, that girl who just danced wasn't bad. I was telling that dimwit Wilfred that Ethel liked him and he should go after her if he liked her back, or he'd regret it. In the end, I turned out to be the dimwit. That was the truth. I had misunderstood. Realizing Arthur had told me everything, I decided to answer the question he had asked in the car earlier. Arthur, in year 11, it was because my mom had a car accident, and then I dash. Arthur smoothed my messy hair and cradled the back of my head, pulling me into his embrace again. Alaric, if it's painful, we don't have to talk about it. Arthur stroked my hair, saying softly, the past is behind us. It's not too late for everything. Thinking I might still be hungry after 2 puddings, Arthur went back to the kitchen to make me some porridge, insisting I finish it before going to bed. Worried I might have an episode during the night, he paced back and forth in the guest room until I couldn't stand it anymore. I told him to bring a blanket and sleep on the floor, just to stop his constant movement. When I woke up in the morning, Arthur had everything perfectly arranged. All I had to do was wash up and eat. As I ate, I remembered what Edmund had said yesterday about Arthur breaking school rules in secondary school, so I asked him about it. Arthur chewed his food and casually replied, I hit someone. That guy from your class 15, the one who was 3rd from bottom in the year and then dropped to last. Giles Wilson, the one who loved to gossip and spread rumors until they became truth. Did he say something about me? I asked. Arthur lightly tapped my head. No, I just had a bad temper back then and felt like hitting someone. Giles happened to be there. I let out a soft oh and smiled. Arthur looked a bit exasperated. He put some food in my bowl and raised his voice slightly. Eat. Arthur, can you take me to the hospital later? I want to get better soon. Arthur glanced at me and nodded. He knew my illness was my biggest taboo, so he had never brought it up. But I couldn't be that selfish. I couldn't let him hide away with me just because of my illness and his feelings for me. These past few years have been hard for me, but they must have been hard for him too. So for his sake and mine, I needed to make a change. Depression isn't incurable. I used to resist going to the hospital, but for Arthur's sake, I'm willing to seek treatment. As autumn approached, the harvest season began. I heard the front door close in the living room. I turned off the stove, quickly washed my hands, and eagerly ran towards the person entering. Arthur, I want sweet and sour ribs today, I said, looking up at him as I hugged him, then quickly let go. Arthur complained, just 1 hug today? I nodded, then added, 1 hug costs 100 pounds. Deal, Arthur agreed, pulling me back into his arms. I also want pear and rock sugar porridge, meat dumplings, and spring onion stewed ribs. Arthur laughed, exasperated. He pinched my cheek gently. All right, I got it. This poor husband of yours, a working-class man going broke just to hug you, will make it for you in a bit. I burst out laughing. I'm just kidding. I've already made all of that. Although we missed out on 9 years, as Arthur said, as long as we still care, it's not too late.